On a warm summer morning in 1914, a young man stepped from the shadows of a Sarajevo street corner, raised a small Belgian pistol, and fired just 2 shots that would shatter the world. Those bullets, fired in mere seconds, would unleash a catastrophe that consumed 20 million lives and reshaped the destiny of nations. This is the story of the gun that fired twice, the assassination that ignited the Great War, and how a single moment of violence on a cobblestone street became the spark that set Europe ablaze. The weapon itself was unremarkable, a compact Browning Model 1910 that could fit easily in a coat pocket. Yet in the hands of 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip, this 6-shot Belgian-made pistol became the most consequential firearm in human history. 2 bullets, 2 targets, 2 deaths that would trigger a chain reaction of declarations, mobilizations, and battles stretching from the trenches of France to the mountains of the Balkans. The gun that fired twice did not just claim 2 lives that day. It murdered the old world and gave birth to the modern age of total war. But how did we arrive at this moment? How did a tuberculosis-ridden student from a poor Bosnian village come to hold the fate of empires in his trembling hands? To understand the assassination that changed everything, we must first journey into the powder keg that was the Balkans in 1914, where ancient hatreds simmered beneath the surface of a crumbling empire. The Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1914 was a patchwork of peoples, languages, and faiths, held together by imperial will and military might. Within its borders lived Germans and Hungarians, Czechs and Slovaks, Croats and Serbs, each nursing their own dreams of independence. At the empire's heart sat Emperor Franz Joseph, an aging monarch who had ruled for over 6 decades, watching as nationalist movements chipped away at his domain like waves against a crumbling seawall. The most volatile of these territories was Bosnia-Herzegovina, annexed by Austria-Hungary just 6 years earlier in 1908. This act of imperial expansion had sent shockwaves through the Balkans, particularly angering Serbia, which viewed the Bosnian Serbs as their brothers in blood and faith. The annexation was seen not just as territorial theft, but as a deliberate provocation, ape in the face to Serbian assertions of uniting all Slavs under one South. This into flag. Uldren of resentment stepped Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne and nephew to the emperor. Unlike many of his imperial relatives, Franz Ferdinand was a man of contradictions. He possessed a quick temper and an aristocratic disdain for democracy, yet he also harbored genuine concerns about the empire's treatment of its Slavic subjects. His political vision was radical for its time. He proposed transforming the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary into a triple monarchy, creating a third crown that would unite all Slavic territories under autonomous rule. This proposal, known as trialism, was both progressive and threatening. Progressive because it offered the Slavic peoples a voice in their own governance, threatening because it would undermine Serbian dreams of expansion. If Franz Ferdinand succeeded in creating a satisfied and autonomous Slavic kingdom within the empire, why would Bosnian Serbs look to Belgrade for liberation? The Archduke's reforms, if implemented, would kill Serbian nationalism not with bullets but with ballots. Franz Ferdinand's personal life added another layer of complexity to his character. In 1900, he had married Sophie, a Czech countess whose noble birth was insufficient by Habsburg standards. Their marriage was morganatic, meaning Sophie could never share his imperial rank and their children could never inherit the throne. This romantic sacrifice humanized the Archduke in ways that imperial protocol usually prevented. He was not just an heir to power, but a man who had chosen love over dynastic ambition. The couple's devotion to each other was genuine and touching. Sophie accompanied Franz Ferdinand on his travels despite the social humiliation of being forced to walk behind him at official functions. There was one exception to this cruel protocol. When the Archduke acted in his military capacity, Sophie could stand beside him as an equal. This loophole would prove fateful, for it was precisely Franz Ferdinand's role as Inspector General of the Imperial Army that brought him to Sarajevo in June 1914. The timing of the visit could hardly have been more provocative. June 28th was Vidovdan, St. Vitus Day, the most sacred date in the Serbian calendar. It marked the anniversary of the Battle of Kosovo in 1389, when Serbian forces had fallen to the Ottoman Empire, beginning centuries of Turkish rule. More recently, it commemorated Serbia's victory in the Second Balkan War in 1913. For Serbian nationalists, The Archduke's decision to inspect troops in Bosnia on this holiest of days was an intolerable insult, a calculated provocation that demanded an answer. That answer was already being prepared in the shadowy networks of Belgrade, where a secret organization known as Unification or Death, better known as the Black Hand, plotted against the Habsburg monarchy. Founded in 1911 by Serbian military officers, the Black Hand operated like a revolutionary cell, its members bound by blood oaths and codes of silence. At its head stood Colonel Dragutin Dimitrijevic, known by his code name Apis, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness was matched only by his dedication to the dream of a greater Serbia. When news reached Belgrade that Franz Ferdinand would visit Sarajevo, the Black Hand saw opportunity. The Archduke's reform proposals made him a target, but his symbolic value made him irresistible. Killing the heir to the Austrian throne would not just eliminate a political threat, it would send a message that reverberated across Europe. No Habsburg was safe from Serbian vengeance. The Black Hand began recruiting assets for the operation. They found willing volunteers among the young Bosnian Serb students who had come to Belgrade seeking education, and found instead the intoxicating rhetoric of nationalism. These young men, barely out of adolescence, burned with righteous fury at what they saw as Austrian oppression. They were eager to strike a blow for freedom, even if it cost them their lives. 3 volunteers stepped forward to form the core assassination team. Nedeljko Kabrinovic, 20 years old, was a printer's apprentice with a flair for the dramatic. Trifko Grabez, 19, was a quiet student whose calm demeanor masked deep wells of determination. And then there was Gavrilo Princip, the youngest at 19, a frail young man whose body was already being consumed by tuberculosis, but whose spirit burned with revolutionary fervor. Princip was born in 1,894 inches, the remote village of Oblaj, in western Bosnia, to a family of poor Serb peasants. His father Milan scratched out a living from rocky soil, while his mother Marija bore 9 children, 6 of whom died in infancy. Gavrilo was small and sickly, but he possessed a fierce intelligence that caught the attention of local priests. At 13, he was sent to Sarajevo to continue his education, leaving behind the poverty of rural life for the political awakening that awaited in the city. In Sarajevo, Princip encountered ideas that would shape his destiny. He read about Serbian heroes and martyrs, absorbed the writings of nationalist poets, and joined student societies that met in secret to discuss revolution. The young man who had arrived from the countryside as a peasant was transformed into a dedicated revolutionary, willing to die for the cause of South Slavic liberation. The Black Hand took these 3 young men to Topsida Forest outside Belgrade for training. There, under the cover of ancient trees, they learned to handle bombs and pistols. Major Vojislav Tankosic, a veteran of the Balkan Wars, supervised their instruction, teaching them not just how to kill but how to die. Each conspirator was given a capsule of cyanide to swallow if captured, ensuring they would take their secrets to the grave. Princip proved to be the most natural marksman of the 3, his steady hands and keen eye compensating for his frail constitution. The irony was not lost on his instructors that this dying boy might prove to be death incarnate for the Habsburg dynasty. As the training concluded, the conspirators were equipped with their tools of assassination. Each received 2 bombs manufactured in the Serbian state arsenal, weapons small enough to conceal beneath a coat, yet powerful enough to destroy a carriage. More importantly, each was given a Browning Model 1910 pistol, the cutting-edge Belgian firearm that would soon earn its place in infamy. The Browning was a marvel of modern engineering, designed by the legendary American gunsmith John Moses Browning. Unlike the bulky revolvers of previous generations, this semi-automatic pistol was sleek and compact, measuring just over 6 inches in length and weighing barely 1.5 pounds when loaded. Its 380 caliber rounds packed sufficient stopping power while allowing for rapid follow-up shots. The magazine held 7 rounds, though the conspirators would need far fewer to change the course of history. On May 28, 1914, exactly 1 month before their target would arrive in Sarajevo, the 3 assassins departed Belgrade. They traveled separately to avoid detection, following smuggling routes established by Serbian intelligence through the porous border between Serbia and Bosnia. Hidden compartments in riverboats carried them across the Drina, while sympathetic farmers provided safe houses and guides through the mountainous terrain. The journey was fraught with danger and doubt. Austrian border guards patrolled the frontier, Alert for Serbian infiltrators, local gendarmes questioned suspicious travelers, and the conspirators knew that capture meant torture and execution. Yet they pressed forward, sustained by their belief that they were instruments of divine justice, chosen to strike down the oppressor and liberate their people. As the assassins made their way toward Sarajevo, the Black Hand was expanding the conspiracy beyond the original 3 volunteers. In the Bosnian capital, Danilo Ilic, a former teacher turned revolutionary organizer, recruited additional conspirators from among the city's disaffected youth. Mohamed Mehmed Basic, a Bosnian Muslim carpenter, joined the plot despite the religious divide that often separated Orthodox Serbs from their Muslim neighbors. Kvetko Popovic and Vaso Čubrilović, both students barely past their 17th birthdays, volunteered for what they knew was likely a suicide mission. By early June, 6 conspirators were positioned along the route the Archduke's motorcade would travel through Sarajevo. Each was armed with bombs and pistols, each carried cyanide, and each understood that success would likely mean death. They were not professional assassins, but idealistic young men, intoxicated by dreams of martyrdom and national liberation. Their very amateurishness made them dangerous, for they had nothing to lose and everything to prove. The weapons they carried told the story of a world in transition. The bombs were relics of an older age of political violence, crude devices that relied on timing and luck to find their targets. But the pistols represented the future of warfare, precision instruments that placed life and death at the pull of a trigger. The Browning Model 1910 would soon demonstrate that in the modern age, a single determined individual with the right weapon could alter the fate of nations. Meanwhile, in Vienna, Franz Ferdinand made his final preparations for the Bosnian journey. He reviewed military reports, studied maps of the maneuvers he would observe, and considered the political implications of his visit. The Archduke understood the symbolic weight of appearing in Sarajevo on Vidovdan, but he also recognized the necessity of showing Austrian strength in the troubled province. The empire's enemies must see that Habsburg authority extended to every corner of the realm. Sophie's decision to accompany her husband added both tenderness and tragedy to the journey. Friends had warned her of the dangers, noting the recent increase in terrorist incidents throughout the Balkans. But she feared Ferdinand's safety, and for Franz refused to let him travel alone into what many considered hostile territory. Their love story, which had begun in defiance of imperial protocol, would end in the streets of Sarajevo, 2 lives cut short by the bullets of fanatical nationalism. The couple's final days in Vienna were spent in quiet domestic pursuits. They visited with their children Max, Ernst, and Sophie, ages 12, 10, and 9 respectively. Franz Ferdinand played with his sons in the gardens of the Belvedere Palace, while Sophie tended to household affairs. Neither parent could have imagined that they were living their last peaceful moments, that within weeks their children would be orphans and Europe would be consumed by war. On June 23rd, the imperial couple departed Vienna by train, traveling southeast through the heart of the empire toward Bosnia. The journey took them through landscapes that embodied the diversity and complexity of the Habsburg realm. German-speaking villages gave way to Hungarian towns, which in turn yielded to Croatian settlements as the train carried them toward their destiny. At each station, local officials gathered to pay their respects, unaware that they were witnessing the last peacetime journey of Austria-Hungary's heir apparent. As Franz Ferdinand's train rolled towards Sarajevo, the final pieces of the assassination plot were falling into place. The conspirators had received word of the Archduke's exact schedule and route through contacts in the local government. They knew he would arrive at the railway station on the morning of June 28th, proceed to the city hall for an official reception, then travel to the military barracks outside the city to observe troop exercises. Most crucially, they knew the motorcade would travel along Apthiel Quay, the wide boulevard that ran parallel to the Miljacka River through the heart of Sarajevo. The assassins positioned themselves at strategic points along this route, creating a gauntlet of death through which the Archduke's car would have to pass. Mehmed Basic took his place near the Kumurja Bridge, the first choke point where the motorcade would be vulnerable. Kabrinovic stationed himself further along the quay, his bombs concealed beneath his coat. Popovic and Čubrilović found positions in the crowd that would line the streets to watch the imperial procession. And Gavrilo Princip, the frail young man whose tubercular cough had earned him the nickname the Ghost, made his way to a spot near the Latin Bridge. There, outside Schiller's Delicatessen, He waited with death in his pocket and revolution in his heart. The stage was set, the actors were in position, and history held its breath for the performance that would change everything. The morning of June 28th dawned clear and warm over Sarajevo, the ancient city nestled in a valley surrounded by hills that seemed to hold their breath in anticipation. By had already 7 o'clock. Crowds began gathering along the designated route, a mixture of curious onlookers, loyal subjects, and those who harbored darker intentions. Austrian security forces, confident in their preparations, conducted final sweeps of the area while local police took their positions at key intersections. At the railway station, officials in their finest uniforms assembled to greet the heir to the throne. The platform gleamed with fresh paint and polished brass, while military bands rehearsed the imperial anthem one final time. Everything had been choreographed to perfection, a display of Habsburg power and pageantry designed to impress both supporters and potential enemies. Yet beneath this veneer of control, subtle signs of unease rippled through the crowd. Franz Ferdinand's train arrived precisely on schedule, steam hissing from the locomotive as it ground to a halt. The Archduke emerged first, resplendent in his military uniform adorned with medals and ceremonial braiding. Sophie followed, elegant in a white dress and broad-brimmed hat that shielded her face from the morning Sunday. Together they embodied the grace and authority of the old European order, unaware that they were stepping into the crosshairs of history. The motorcade that awaited them consisted of 6 automobiles, a symbol of modernity that contrasted sharply with the medieval stones of Sarajevo's old quarter. Franz Ferdinand and Sophie took their places in the second car, an open-topped Graf und stiff double phaeton that would provide perfect visibility for the crowds and, tragically, for anyone who wished them harm. General Oskar Potiorek, the military governor of Bosnia, sat beside them while Count Franz von Busch-Waldeck occupied the front passenger seat. As the procession began its journey through the city, the first conspirator prepared to strike. Mehmed Basic, positioned near the Kumorja Bridge, watched the approaching vehicles with sweating palms. The moment he had trained for was at hand, yet as the Archduke's car drew near, he hesitated. Perhaps it was the sight of Sophie's serene face, or the realization that innocent bystanders would die alongside his target, but the Bosnian Muslim allowed the motorcade to pass without acting. Further along the route, Nedeljko Kabrinović felt no such qualms. The young printer's apprentice had steeled himself for martyrdom, and as Franz Ferdinand's car approached his position near the Miljacka River, he pulled the pin from one of his bombs. The device, roughly the size of a man's fist and filled with shrapnel, would explode 10 seconds after activation. Kabrinović hurled it with all his strength toward the Archduke's vehicle. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The bomb struck the folded canvas roof of the car and bounced backward, rolling beneath the following vehicle before detonating with a tremendous roar. Smoke and debris filled the air as shrapnel tore through metal and flesh. Several spectators were wounded, and Count Busch-Waldeck suffered cuts to his face and neck, but Franz Ferdinand and Sophie remained unharmed. The failed assassination attempt threw the entire procession into chaos. Kabrinović, following his instructions, immediately swallowed his cyanide capsule and leaped into the shallow Miljacka River, hoping to drown if the poison failed to work. The crowd, initially stunned by the explosion, now surged forward in confusion and anger. Some sought to help the wounded, while others pursued the would-be assassin. Ironically, both the cyanide and the river failed Kabrinović. The poison was old and weak, inducing violent nausea but not death, while the Miljacka in summer was barely 3 feet deep. He was quickly dragged from the water by police and angry citizens, his face green from the failed poison, his body battered by the blows of outraged onlookers. Franz Ferdinand, shaken but unharmed, insisted that the procession continue to the town hall as planned. His decision reflected both courage and a fatal underestimation of the danger that still awaited. The remaining conspirators, scattered along the route, watched in dismay as their carefully orchestrated plot unraveled. Some lost their nerve entirely, melting away into the crowd rather than risk capture. At the town hall, the Archduke's composure finally cracked. As Mayor Fahim Efendi Kircic began his prepared speech of welcome, Franz Ferdinand interrupted with barely controlled fury. "Mr. Mayor, I came here on a visit and I am greeted with bombs. It is outrageous." The words hung in the air like an accusation, a moment of raw emotion that revealed the human being beneath facade the imperial. Sophie, ever the diplomat, whispered calming words in her husband's ear. The Archduke collected himself, apologized for his outburst, and allowed the ceremony to proceed. But his speech, still damp with blood from being in the damaged car, served as a grim reminder of how close death had come that morning. During the reception, heated discussions took place about whether to continue with the planned program. General Potiorek, embarrassed by the security failure, argued that the military exercises should proceed as scheduled. Others counseled caution, suggesting that the royal couple return immediately to Vienna. Franz Ferdinand, however, made a decision that would seal his fate. He insisted on visiting the hospital where those injured in the morning's explosion had been taken. This act of compassion and duty would prove to be his final mistake. The decision to deviate from the planned route created confusion among the drivers, none of whom had been informed of the change. As the motorcade departed the town hall, it followed the original path along Appel Quay rather than the revised route to the hospital. Gavrilo Princip, meanwhile, had given up hope. The morning's failure had scattered the conspiracy, and he believed the opportunity for assassination had passed. Dejected and ill, he made his way to Schiller's Delicatessen on Franz Joseph Street, perhaps seeking refreshment or simply a moment's rest. The frail young man, already dying from tuberculosis, appeared to be just another face in the crowd. Then fate intervened with cruel precision. Franz Ferdinand's driver, Leopold Lojka, realized his mistake as he turned onto Franz Joseph Street. This was not the route to the hospital. Following shouted instructions from General Potiorek, he began to reverse the car, backing slowly toward Appel Quay. The vehicle came to a stop directly in front of the delicatessen where Princip stood, barely 5 feet separating the assassin from his target. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the two men looked at each other across that narrow gap. Franz Ferdinand, heir to one of Europe's greatest empires, and Gavrilo Princip, the consumptive son of peasants, locked eyes in a moment of mutual recognition. Princip's hand moved to his coat pocket where the Browning pistol waited. The weapon felt cold and heavy in his trembling fingers as he drew it forth. 7 rounds nested in the magazine, more than enough to change the world. The young revolutionary raised the gun with both hands, steadying himself against the weakness that tuberculosis had wrought in his body. Sophie, seeing the danger, threw herself across her husband's body in a desperate attempt to shield him. Her white dress, so pristine that morning, would soon be stained with blood as love battled against hatred in the narrow confines of Franz Joseph Street. Princip pulled the trigger twice in rapid succession, the sharp cracks of the pistol echoing off the surrounding buildings. The first bullet struck Sophie in the abdomen, tearing through her stomach and severing a major artery. The second found Franz Ferdinand's neck, cutting through his jugular vein with surgical precision. The Archduke, feeling the warm wetness spreading across his uniform, reached out to his dying wife. Sophie, don't die. Live for our children." His voice carried across the suddenly silent street, a final cry of love that would haunt those who heard it for the rest of their lives. Within minutes, both were dead. Sophie succumbed first, her life ebbing away as she was carried into the governor's residence. Franz Ferdinand followed 10 minutes later, his final words a whispered repetition of, "It is nothing, it is nothing," even as his life flowed away through the wound in his throat. Princip, his mission accomplished, turned the gun on himself, but the weapon was torn from his grasp by horrified bystanders. The cyanide he swallowed proved as ineffective as Kabrinovich's had been, leaving him alive to face the consequences of his actions. As police dragged him away, the young assassin showed no remorse, only a grim satisfaction that he had struck a blow for Serbian nationalism. The 2 shots fired that morning would echo around the world with devastating effect. Within hours, telegraph lines buzzed with news of the assassination. In Vienna, Emperor Franz Joseph received the news with stoic grief, mourning not just the loss of his nephew, but the heir who might have reformed the empire. In Belgrade, Serbian officials scrambled to distance themselves from the attack, knowing that suspicion would inevitably fall upon them. But it was too late for diplomacy or denials. The gun that fired twice had set in motion a chain of events that no statesman could control. Austria-Hungary, humiliated and enraged, would soon deliver an ultimatum to Serbia that was designed to be rejected. Russia would mobilize to protect its Slavic ally, while Germany would honor its pledge to Austria. France and Britain would be drawn in by their own treaty obligations, and within a month, the great powers of Europe would be locked in a conflict that would consume a generation. The assassination had claimed 2 lives in Sarajevo, but its true cost would be measured in the millions who would die in the trenches of the Western Front, the mountains of the Italian Alps, and the vast expanses of the Eastern Front. The old world of empires and kings was dying, and from its ashes would rise the modern age of total war, revolutionary ideologies, and global conflict. And so the echoes of those 2 shots faded into the summer air of Sarajevo, but their reverberations would shake the foundations of civilization itself. In the span of mere seconds, a dying boy with a Belgian pistol had murdered not just an Archduke and his beloved wife, but the entire world order that had kept Europe at peace for nearly a century. The gun that fired twice had spoken with a voice that would be heard in every capital from London to St. Petersburg, from Berlin to Paris, as the great powers stumbled toward the abyss. Gavrilo Princip would die in an Austrian prison cell 4 years later, his tuberculosis finally claiming the life that cyanide had failed to take. He never lived to see the full consequences of his actions, never witnessed the millions of graves that would be dug across Europe, never heard the thunder of artillery that would make his 2 pistol shots seem like whispers. Franz Ferdinand's dream of a reformed empire died with him on Franz Joseph Street, along with any hope that the old world might adapt and survive. The Browning Model 1910 that changed history was seized as evidence, a silent witness to the moment when the 19th century ended and the 20th began in earnest. 2 bullets, 2 deaths, and 20 million more would follow as Europe tore itself apart in the war to end all wars. Sometimes the smallest actions create the greatest consequences, and sometimes history pivots on the pull of a single trigger, fired twice in the streets of an ancient city on a summer morning that the world would never forget.